All right, it's Movember, day 14, and I just finished group, run a men's group on a Wednesday night, and it's always a privilege to spend time in this environment. I'm a recovering person myself, I always learn something from it, and as Patrick Kahn said, we use the phrase tonight, you know, when people get together and share their awkward details and they reveal themselves, you know, you get that real empathy, and it's that connection. There's nothing that seems to replicate that sense of connection when you can actually be yourself and share yourself and have other people say, I hear you and I'm like you, you know. Tonight, like in every group that I run around developmental trauma disorder, is that there is the toxic level of shame. And so tonight I want to present the shame map that John Bradshaw presented in his Inner Child, Healing the Wounded Child sort of work of his. His book, Healing the Shame That Binds You, is still a classic book. And John said that he stood on the shoulders of giants to write that book. And I would say that anybody working with shame in this day and age is standing on his shoulders, because he brought it to the wider community. And he was an alcoholic from an alcoholic family, and then once he got sober and looked at his eating disorders and his sex addiction, he saw himself in this map. I see myself in this map, so I just want to present it. It is, again, just another tool. If you're watching this and it doesn't fit your worldview, or it doesn't fit what works for you, please continue to reach out and ask for the help that will help you. John makes that point that we all come into this world a perfect little being, and we're a child of God, if you believe that, a child of the universe, but we come into this life hopefully pure. As I say that, of course, being a therapist, I think of the people that come in and they've already come in addicted to drugs due to their parents' choices, etc. But for the purpose of this exercise, the child themselves has made no decisions of their own. They're here to be cared for and looked after. Now, what happens if that person doesn't get that safe environment where the big people in it are there to engage with and meet their needs age appropriately over time? So they grow up to have inherent worth, learn how to set personal boundaries, learn how to identify with their reality, the physical, spiritual sensations they get in their body, their conscious mind, their emotions, their behaviors, and look after the needs and wants that present themselves age appropriately and moderately. If they don't get those skills, what happens? So John makes the point that we start off as a precious child, but then fairly quickly what can happen is if we experience around this neglect or abuse. Now, when Pia Melody started talking about trauma, she redefined trauma for a lot of us, which was largely just seen as sexual or physical abuse, overt. But she got people to rethink and redefine. And with the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experience study, they started to look for less than nurturing behaviour and its impact, and saw conclusive evidence that it doesn't have to be an overt trauma. Ongoing humiliation or neglect can cause this interruption to a person's development and activate our bodies and brain survival mechanisms, the things that are there to protect us. So if we experience neglect and abuse, then this preciousness gets overrun. And due to the self-centered nature of children, the internal experience is that we take it on, that there's a wound there. Now this precious child experiences neglect and abuse, and early on we will go into the next line of defense. Now, young children will go into disassociation. Now, I'm dyslexic, so if you're a perfectionist out there, you're really going to freak out, because I'm not going to spell the way you want me to. Disassociation. We will also go into minimizing. So we will make things small. We'll go into denial, pretend it's not happening. And even as we sort of get a little older, we'll go into delusion. And delusion, denial is we know it's happening, but we keep telling ourselves it isn't happening. Delusion is when we start to go mad and we don't see it when it's right in front of us because we can't see it. Because if we saw it, the level of distress we would go to would be catastrophic. So when that precious child experiences neglect and abuse, the first defenses we have are those midbrain strategies. They're thank God, they're there. The limbic part of the brain goes into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And I did the 4Fs. I'll be doing the 4Fs coming up. So this first line of defense, we're quite powerless over this. We will disassociate if we feel we're at threat. Our body will freeze. And so these defenses we're largely powerless over, and they'll come to our aid. And they can be really difficult when we have them overly sensitive to relational trauma because they will get triggered in our adult life. And this is the nature of complex post-traumatic stress as I experienced it just at the coalface. Because what these relational sort of mechanisms, defense mechanisms, get triggered when you're 45 in the lounge room with your partner or with your boss at an appraisal, etc. So the next layer of protection from this sort of woundedness, and I suppose what I wanted to sort of put right at our core when that precious child doesn't get a chance to experience or develop, is that we end up with this sort of toxic shame core around our reality. And so the next layer of defense is the roles that will be available to us in a family. And they're real basic roles because you can learn these from being a toddler onwards. You can start to become heroic in the family. That 2 or 3-year-old that's sitting by mum or daddy's bed if they're depressed or catatonic and they're just making sure they're okay. That's all they can do. And so we'll go into the hero. Sometimes we'll go into, being a scapegoat. We can't be as helpful as the hero, so we act out and get negative attention because that's better than no attention at all. We might become the cute one, become a mascot and try and bring humor and relief to the family. Or we might just learn because there's no space left for us just to get lost. And the younger we are in that role, we can get lost in a family home. We can get lost in the lounge room and everyone's there. But these roles will develop very, very young and get more sophisticated. So they have sort of a 0 to 7, like a 2 to 3 to 7 aspect to it. So they're very crude. And then as we get more sophisticated, as our frontal cortex develops and we get more mature, even though we're developmentally immature, we will be able to be the hero. Could be cutting everyone's lunch, doing the washing, making sure the house is good. The scapegoat could be really acting out the negativity, getting expelled from school, getting labels from psychiatrists, oppositional defiance disorder, ADHD. You could get, lost children now really shutting down, disassociating, not going to school. The worst extremes of these can start to develop. On top of these roles, we'll then go into sort of a more established sort of defense mechanism. So where we're, if I had to sort of define this, I would say that the earlier ones are sort of a 0 to 7. These defenses are a 7 to 17 sort of aspect, although they can be younger than that. But they're just more sophisticated. So we'll start to have roles where we might, or not so much roles, but just defenses. So I'll just use another colour so we can see it. You can do things like you'll use humour. We might use anger. We might become the fixer. We could start to go into control. We'll start to use things where we lie and get dishonest. You will go through a whole variety of behaviours. The hero might develop, we become a martyr. We could become a saviour. We could also start to rebel. But these defence mechanisms start to get more sophisticated. What you're looking back here, sometimes if I was, say, lecturing on this at the hospital I used to work at, you'd ask people, look, if you're having trouble looking at your own defences, because this is where these, if I keep thinking of things as I'm talking to you, but we start to rationalize, we might intellectualize. So we'll do anything except go inside. That's the whole goal. What this is all about is keeping me moving out. So I don't feel this intolerable sense of being. All these early defenses to disconnect me from this intolerable sense of self. And so the further we go out, the scapegoats, the heroes, right out to these defenses we're talking about now, the whole point is to keep me away from feeling this suffocating shutdown of the sense of self. And so if you have trouble with these sorts of defenses, just do your family's inventory. What were the defenses that you experienced in the family? What were dad's defenses? How did they deal with intimacy or conflict? What were mum's defenses? What were the broader network of people that cared for you if you had a nanny or went to boarding school? What were the defenses of the people that had spent a lot of time with you? Because largely that's how we learn to take care of ourselves. And if you really need to distance yourself from you'll learn these, really well. So do mum and dad's defenses if you're really struggling to sort of work out your own. And then last but not least, what's on the outside of this is that we have these behavioral cover-ups, the stuff that we do that we now get access to in our adult life, and we can learn this early on, but this is where we start to act out. We might use food, sex, nicotine, drugs and alcohol fit in here, and to keep it to sex separate, you might go for love and relationship addiction. We can go into gambling, work, TV, gaming, the internet, exercise, all these things again. Some of these chemically so, just numb us out, block us out, keep us distant just for another day. Now we can, even in these behavioural cover-ups, for some of us, they fit the criteria of addiction: compulsive use, impaired control, continued use in spite of consequence, elements of denial, and then elements of craving that have withdrawal and tolerance sort of scales in them. We can fit that. It can just be a use issue or an abuse issue. But if we're doing it to distance ourselves from us, to break relationship with self, then largely what we are just trying to stay away from is this toxic shame core. Now what happens, just a couple of tips on why this stuff can be useful. For some of us it's overwhelming. I know when I first looked at this, I thought, man, this is it's ridiculous. It's too much. How the hell am I ever going to deal with this? Because what happened for me is I went to a 12-step fellowship and I was able to cross drugs and alcohol out and go, great, that was good, and then ended up in the sex and love addiction fellowship, and yeah, okay, well I could cross that out. It took me a while to get rid of nicotine, but I crossed that out. But then over the years, and still can, struggling with food and making decisions to overwork, using too much TV sometimes, or too much net at times in my life, exercise. Lucky I haven't had the gambling, but the love and avoidance addiction. So even on a behavioural cover-up level, you can be in recovery and long-term sober or clean from a certain addiction, but still making a choice to act out. There's a man online, he's written two good books that I know about, a man called Lee McCormick. And he writes challenging things. And Lee, I'll tag you into this, you might listen to this, you might not. But he talks very much about, my understanding. So please forgive me if I've got this wrong, but it's this idea that recovery is not just about staying with labels and staying with the recovery programs that treatment centers tell us we should have. It's finding something that works for you that brings you back to yourself and promotes that self into being the best self that you can be. That we're spiritual beings, that we're part of this whole universe. If you're a Christian, you're a child of God, There's a whole kingdom waiting for you if we can start that relationship with Jesus. So whatever it is that you're into, there's a bigger aspect than this. We're not just the absence of toxic shame, that there's a doorway to work through here. And if we don't make a decision to put down these behavioral cover-ups, then we will continue to experience life, and I use the phrase sloppy and recklessly, because we keep turning the light off, not being willing to become conscious and take responsibility. So recovery, the challenge is to take responsibility to deal with these, but what they call these cover-ups on the outside, to stop covering up, so we can go back through and start to address, what they would call in the 12-step fellowships, character defects in the defense mechanisms, to start to challenge and identify when we go into roles, so we can just be ourselves and not have to carry those scripts from our childhood. And the most difficult of all is learn how to nurture and regulate this earlier damage to our nervous system. And there's been incredible breakthroughs in that, where we can get that trauma out, not just with CBT. I think there's a great place for CBT, but it will not get us to the promised land, because we've been damaged at a cellular, physical, somatic level. The midbrain's been damaged. So things like brain spotting has incredible results with people with trauma. Trauma release exercises, Pat Ogden's work, sensory motor psychotherapy, Peter Levine's work, somatic experiencing. There is a variety of therapies out there now that go to the body and work with physical experiments to get us through the way that our body is locked down with that trauma. But when I was looking today at some of Bradshaw's work, just to refresh me for tonight, I thought, I'm still impressed with Homecoming, Healing the Shame That Binds You, and then the book Homecoming. It's practical. There's some letter writing and tools to get you in touch with that reparenting aspect, and I'll talk a bit about that in another video. But this is the Shame Core. If you identify with this, please look up Patrick. I always think of Patrick Carnes. Please look up John Bradshaw's work, Healing the Shame That Binds You, and Homecoming in particular. Pia Melody's work, Breaking Free, Facing Codependence. But the work now, if you are interested in brain spotting, it's David Grand, Peter Levine, Pat Ogden. These are the people that are bringing us to the body. Kathy Kane and her somatic work, the Nurturing Resilience book that they've just released. Janina Fisher. It's just the list is endless. And remember, this is a Movember video. Share it if you think it might be useful to someone else. Subscribe to the channel, because I'm going to do a video every day. And remember to be gentle with your heart. Bye.